Hello everybody. So today is the first video of the New Year's. And while I don't typically do quote-unquote New Year's resolutions because, well, they're usually synonymous with never actually getting anything accomplished, I do have some goals this year. And one of the goals is to get more organized. So I started kind of thinking through some ways this morning about how I could get more organized, and decided kind of last minute to do a project here in the garage. And you've probably noticed in some of the videos, just the amount of, well, lack of organization that's all over the place. And so, along with that, just doing a few other repairs on the garage door. So I went and got some lumber, and we're gonna work on building a shelf in the garage today. And so I'm gonna do a 2 foot by 8 foot by 8 foot shelf with a couple of shelves in it. I may have also gotten a few new toys from the Blue Box store while getting some lumber, so we're gonna call them late Christmas presents. So I bought a brand new corded electric circular saw because my cordless one, it's just not very great. I've got a 20 volt Porter cable circular saw, and I don't know, it's the only one of their tools that I just haven't been a big fan of. I've managed to get everything done I ever needed to get done with it. It just feels like it's just a hair short. So useful in a pinch, but not really super consistent. And so I decided to go ahead and get me a new circular saw, and I didn't want to break the bank because I'm not in construction. I don't do a whole lot of construction projects, but I feel like this was a good balance. I also, because a lot of the projects that I do ends up involving plywood, I finally got me a Craig Rip Cut. Not all their stuff's great, but I actually like a lot of the Craig stuff. So I've got their pocket hole jig, and this will make cutting down this plywood a lot easier. In the past, I would just grab one of my long levels and clamp it to the board, and run half a cut and then move my clamps and run another, or I'll get another sheet of plywood, clamp up against it as a guide. There's lots of ways to do it, but I'm tired of doing it that way, so we're gonna see how this goes today. This is a 15 amp Cobalt 7¼ inch blade circular saw. Comes with a single blade. So I actually bought a higher tooth count blade since I'm going to be ripping down the plywood here, and I didn't want it to splinter as bad, so I got me another blade to go with it. So the first thing I'm going to do is actually get my plywood sheets cut down. So I'm going to have 3 or 4 shelves. So I'm going to rip these in half, have 24-inch deep shelves. So the first thing I'm going to do is cut those down so I can get that out of the way. And then I'll start framing up all the shelves, and then we'll start putting the shelf up in the corners. First thing, I'm gonna get my new blade put on, and I have put these on backwards before, and it's really easy to do, but most of them will actually tell you which direction the blade spins. And of course, the blade only has one direction that it should spin, so I made a mistake that day. For the record, it'll still cut, just not very well. Organization has been a challenge for me outside of work, often, because for what I do for a living, I have to stay very organized or things can get out of hand really quickly. And that's not untrue for most other professions and most other things you're going to do. But I wouldn't consider myself naturally a very organized person. And so it's a little more of an effort, and so this is just something I've got to work at, but this is a good start. The first thing I'm going to do is actually clamp the 2 pieces of plywood together. Since the cuts have to be exactly the same, I'm going to clamp them together and actually rip both pieces at the same time. And what I've done is I've actually set the plywood up on top of a couple of 2x4s. To give myself a little bit of a gap and create essentially a table on the floor. That way I can adjust my blade to just barely peek through that bottom piece of plywood, and I can rip these straight on the ground without any need for a tape. Now that I've got those clamped, the next thing I'm going to do is measure my 24 inches in from the edge, mark both sides, and then chalk a line. Now, something the professionals are going to already know, but something that is a rookie mistake that I've made multiple times is I realize I'm going to lose the thickness of the blade. So if you cut something in half, exactly in half, then if you're measuring out, in my case, 48 inches, and I'm going to cut it into two 24-inch sections, they're not going to be exactly 24 inches. And the reason for that is you got to account for the thickness of your blade. And that is something that I frequently forget to do. Keep in mind, if you're doing precision cuts, that you're going to lose the thickness of your blade on your cut. So make sure that when you're marking, that you're cutting to the outside of your line to make sure that you're actually keeping the exact length of whatever it is you want. Since I got a little ahead of myself, I guess the next thing I need to do is to actually get this rip cut hooked up, because I don't have it put together yet. Now, in theory, if this is accurate, measuring out and chalking the line and all of that's unnecessary. But since I've never used one of these, I figure it's best to have a second reference point when doing that cut, just to make sure that, you know, I'm doing this right, because I don't have extra sheets to come back to. So if I ruin these, I guess I'm going back to buy some more. All right, getting that thing put together was pretty easy. So I'm gonna get my safety glasses, my hearing protection, and then we're gonna take our first cut and see how it goes. So that went really well. I've measured both ends on both pieces, and we measure the same, about 23 7/8, or maybe just a hair. They're both sides are within like a 30-second, so they're really close. So yeah, that rip cut was worth its weight, because that took me a fraction of the time. In fact, it probably took me less time to put that together and make the cut than it did just to get everything set up with my straight edges, because I don't have an 8-foot straight edge, so I'm usually using a 4-foot level, clamping, doing half the cut, moving it, getting it realigned, which takes a little bit of finesse, and then doing it again. So this is much better, and I just don't have the room in my garage here to build an outfeed table to be able to do this stuff on the table saw. So, and ripping plywood on a table saw, unless you got a large table saw, is pretty challenging and can be dangerous if you're not careful. All right, so the next thing I'm going to do is start cutting for the shelves. So they're going to be 24 inches deep, and which means I need to cut 21-inch sections in the middle here to be able to frame these out, because they're going to be 8 foot long by 24 inches deep, and I want to put at least 3, maybe 4 supporting sections across the bottom of these shelves, and those will need to be 21 inches. So I'm going to work on getting all those cut, which means I need to get my miter saw out, and then from there that's just about it. So another good thing is I've got a whole bunch of cutoffs from another project where I built the chickshaw, actually, plus some old pallet board stuff that I'm going to use. So I'll actually save quite a bit of some of the long boards for my next project, which is probably going to be the chicken tractors. So I haven't decided what style chicken tractor yet, but we'll get to that. So I'm going to start cutting these down to length. It helps to make sure that this thing is set square before you cut. Can't use that piece. Alright, let's try this again. Much better. Alright, well, I'm going to finish getting all of these cut to length, and then I'll bring you back in when we're getting ready for assembly. Alright, so the next thing I'm going to do is make sure that I get my shelves square. And you can do that a lot of different ways. If you've got a framing square, speed square, you know, jigs, whatever. What I'm going to use are actually a couple of jigs that were given to me, which are these. They make it really easy to be able to clamp into these grooves. And so I'm going to use those to make sure that I get nice and square. And I've said this before, but clamps are worth their weight in gold. Unfortunately, I don't have 2-foot long clamps that can reach end to end on this, or side to side, so I'm gonna have to do corner at a time, but that's all right. Whatever you gotta do, it doesn't have to be perfect, it's just a shelf. Most ideal way to do this would probably be to either use brackets or like pocket holes. Most of the weight's gonna be carried on the outside edges, so I'm not really worried about that. I'm just gonna run screws into the end grain. It's not gonna be as strong, but it's gonna be way stronger than I need it to be. And again, most of the weight's gonna be out on those edges anyways, where you're not going to really see this. This is just for the center braces to keep the plywood from sagging. Alright, I'm going to do that a bunch more times, and then I'll come back when I'm done. Alright, so finally got a little help getting the bottom connected, and here we are. We've got our bottom shelf's fully connected. The second shelf is just clamped into place so I can get some ideas on height. Thinking I might go ahead and just put the shelf on this bottom, the top of the shelf that is, and then do a little measuring from there to see what all I'm going to put there. Because I'm leaning towards putting a lot of my feed and bowls and all that kind of stuff up on that second shelf, the things that I access all the time. But I'm not 100% sure yet, because, well, I'm pretty short, and the top of that shelf right there, as it's mounted right now, is right at 5.5 feet. So anything any higher and I won't really be able to get anything on or off of that shelf without a ladder. And of course the top will be long-term storage for things that we infrequently access. Alright, so I just got finished finally. Found my spacing, and all the spacing is kind of trivial. You know, my middle shelf, or I guess my lower shelf, was just because I wanted it about 1.5 inches off the ground. This middle shelf and the second shelf are gapped so that I can put a couple stacked 5-gallon buckets in there, all my feeders, things of that nature. A lot of the stuff that I use frequently. The second shelf up and between the top, just, again, it's what space was kind of left over. It's enough to stack 2 totes, which is nice. So I'm probably gonna put some of the stuff that I don't use very often in totes and stack them up there. And then at the very top, I'm thinking I'm gonna put some of the extra lumber I've got, just to get it up out of the way. Yeah, so this is it. I put a brace at the bottom just to keep this from being able to rack back and forth. I debated on putting this lower shelf in here actually, but I realized I don't really need that much open space on the very bottom, and it's a lot of lost space for storage of some other stuff, so decided to put that in there. Easy enough to take out if I decide I do need more space in the bottom, but yeah, I mean, I mean, that's that. I don't want to bore you with details, but so now that this is done, I'm really hoping this will be a motivation to stay a little more organized. Of course, I've got to actually get all the stuff together and put it on the shelf now, but at least I've got a place to start storing stuff. And, you know, just like when I bought the tractor, no more excuses. Now it's time to get organized. So maybe I'll do a follow-up once I get this thing organized, and we'll see how the rest of the garage looks. But in the meantime, thanks for watching. Have a good rest of your day.